Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into the Sabaton history episode for the fall of the Swedish Empire, essentially. Um, I am going to put out another Sabaton song later on this afternoon. I am, not entirely sure exactly when it'll be out, but it should be out relatively quickly after this video. I would say within, a couple of hours. Um, So that'll be coming out. Also, interestingly, with the fall of Sweden, I have been reading a book over the fall of the Assyrian Empire, right? Um, and that's the Assyrian Empire. Oh the mix up with they had with Babylon and conquering the lands of Sumer and Judea and the whole expansion of the Assyrian Empire. And one of the things that got me thinking about in regards to the stuff we've been covering with Sweden is Sweden and most modern or like countries that are still around today are probably pretty lucky historically that when their empire fell, they were able to maintain a state, right? Um, One of the things that you know I've been looking at with regards to Assyria is that you have Greeks, way after the fall of Assyria, Greeks fighting Persians who come across these cities that are in ruins, right? Assyrian cities that are in ruins because nobody's lived there for forever. And they can't imagine uh, who built it. Like they're asking locals like who can build stuff like this? And the locals, because nobody has lived in these ruins in these cities for so long, um, the locals don't know. It's all like wives' tales. It's all legend and myth, and so nobody really knows. And historically, that is what happens when empires fall, right? Like the fall of an empire is normally the total collapse or destruction of that civilization. Um, and it could be from natural disasters or it could be from, you know, enemies or vassals all turning at the same time. Um, it can be from a whole range of different things, but the reality is that for a long, long stretch of history, the empire was like a comet or a shooting star or something like that. It just shot up as bright and hot as it possibly could until it completely burned out. And then it would collapse and fall, and then there would be another empire that kind of absorbed it or popped up where it was, or one of the vassals that had been under that empire, then it grew into an empire of its own. Um, that's a very interesting time period and part of history to me. But it made me think of this stuff with the fall of the Swedish Empire that we've been talking about because it's just not common historically. It's not common to have an empire collapse and still maintain a place on the world stage. Now, that's more common the closer to kind of modern history that you get. Um, but, over time that wasn't the reality for most empires. And so as I guess brutal as it is that the Swedish Empire collapsed, it's like, yeah, but all things considered, it's like it actually came out all right in the wash. Um, so anyway, I'm anxious to get into this Sabaton history on the fall of the empire. Let's get into it.
All empires eventually crumble. including the Swedish Empire. This is Ruina Imperii.
It was a cold day for the Swedish forces in front of the Norwegian fortress of Fredrikshavn. Their sappers had dug their trenches close towards the fortress walls, well within musket distance of the defenders, and all soldiers kept their heads down if they did not want to come under sporadic fire. Dusk came, and soon darkness fell over the battlefield. The defenders lit torches on the walls and shot fireballs into the air to illuminate the night sky. This evening, King Charles XII, Karl den Tolfte, chose to walk the trenches with his officers. Karl was in a good mood, and he was intrigued by the activities on the fortress walls. Curious, he climbed towards the top of the trench, despite the vehement protests of his officers. Waving them aside, he lay down alongside the breastwork, with his head and arms over the slope. Behind him, the officers were arguing, urging their king to caution, to get back to safety. The darkness made it more difficult to spot him, but no musket ball would distinguish His Royal Highness from the common soldier. By then it was 9 o'clock, and the moon reappeared from behind the clouds. The king rested his cheek on his left hand and watched the scene. Suddenly, the officers heard a dull sound, as if a stone fell from the skies on the cold earth. Karl's head lay motionless on the ground. "Lord Jesus, the king has been shot!" Karl den Tolfte was killed at the age of 36 in the 22nd year of his reign. His body was carried by his loyal soldiers through the snowy Norwegian mountains and back to Stockholm, where he was soon laid to rest. The war in Norway was abandoned. The armies went home. Seemingly overnight, the Swedish Empire crumbled. Deprived of her king, all ambitions of restoring the nation to its old glory vanished, and the vision of a Swedish Empire beyond Scandinavia died with Carolus Rex. Karl's rule passed to his sister Ulrika Eleonora and then to his brother-in-law Frederick after a couple years. The Swedish soldiers were forced to fight the Russian fleet in the coming years as they began pillaging the Swedish shores and islands. But although the Swedes were still fighting, even if it was just to keep the homeland safe, peace was on the horizon. In the treaties of Frederiksborg and Nystad, Sweden lost all its Baltic territories, which Russian Tsar Peter had already occupied, and its dominions in northern Germany were partitioned among her other enemies. Sweden's empire had ended. But away from the endless wars and Karl's ever unfulfilled desire for conquest, Sweden finally had a chance to recover. The Swedes had suffered much during the last years of Karl's reign, and the burdens of the last 10 years had ruined the state. Just like the soldiers in the field, the Swedish peasants had to suffer and endure a great deal simply to do their duty to king and country. The ever-increasing demands made upon the yeomanry impoverished most of Sweden's farmers. The obligations to supply the crown with grain and fodder, horses and carts, had left many with little for themselves. In addition, the way the Swedish military system was designed, each farm had to maintain up to 3 soldiers. Each Swede was to supply soldiers with not only food, but with luxuries like tobacco and spirits. Bad harvests worsened their lot, bringing famine and disease. Sweden's south, the breadbasket of the nation, saw a massive decline in population during Karl's reign. Farmsteads had been deserted as the young men went to war. Travelers made remarks.
Yeah, so this isn't sustainable, right? Like, regardless of what the war front looks like, whether you're winning or losing or expanding or contracting, this isn't sustainable. You can't have your farmers not being able to feed anybody, right? Like, if if all of the food and all of everything is going to, even if it's not going to the army, but even as long as it's being like shipped out, um, obviously you saw this in the Soviet Union, right? Where you saw um, grain exports, so all of the food's being sent out. There isn't enough food to feed the actual population, and specifically the farm population. And as you have farmers that leave their land or die or whatever, um, that food total just gets lower and lower and lower until you reach the point of mass widespread famine. It's not a sustainable model.
About the dismal existence of the Swedish farmers and the absence of young men in the countryside. Some said they did not see a single man between the ages of 20 and 40 in the whole country except for those in the army. Commerce and foreign trade had nearly stopped because of the constant state of war. Trading with the Baltic provinces became mostly impossible and revenues dried up. While Swedish ships remained at anchor, British, Dutch, and Danish merchants exploited the gap and took over the markets. The ensuing lack of raw materials and resources soon crippled manufacturers all over Sweden. Karl XI had left his son a...
And real quick, what's really interesting about all of this, right, is that when you look with hindsight, the move, at least to me, seems pretty obvious. The move is not territorial expansion in the way that a lot of the rulers viewed growing an empire at this time. The move was naval expansion, right? Because that's what the trade rules the world. You know, if you have at this time period the navy and the merchants and ships that can essentially explore, kind of conquer and hold down trade routes, you basically have the keys to the car for this time period and where the world is going, right? Like the direction the world is going. And so it's kind of an interesting thing here that the territorial expansion on land made the expansion of naval assets, whether it's, state ships or merchants or whatever, it actually made that pull back significantly. And when you look at where the world's going, the opposite was probably what was needing to be done at this time period.
Full treasury. And while Sweden was victorious in the field, the wars would partly pay for themselves through plunder and subsidies. But the longer the wars dragged on and eventually turned against the Swedes, the debt rose to unbearable levels. In the final years of Karl XII's reign, the royal treasury accumulated a debt of over £1 million. The Swedish economy, flooded with nearly worthless paper money and metal tokens, was about to collapse. Karl had been the one who stood in the way of peace. While he was alive, he would have never accepted a compromise that would not restore the territory he had lost. A disadvantageous peace, even just for the sake of his nation, would have been unacceptable to that monarch. Karl, however, was not indifferent to the suffering of the Swedes, nor was he the evil tyrant who exploited them for the sake of his own glory, as his enemies often portrayed him. But Karl lived in the moment. He looked to his immediate needs, on how to finance the next strike against his enemies, and left the internal problems to his pretty powerless ministers. In the field, Karl willingly shared the hardships of the soldiers. He slept on the same cold ground, ate the same meager meals, and exposed himself to mortal danger time and again. As a king, he valued valor, modesty, piety, and restraint above all else. While on campaign, no one would have taken Karl for a king if they did not know him. He wore no expensive garb, no jewels, not even fur or armor. As a commander, Karl cared deeply for his subordinates. He was reassuring to his officers and kind to even the lowliest servant. Although never on familiar terms, he took great care of those that shed blood in his name. Often he was found sitting in silence, sharing the soldier's lot as he mourned those that had fallen in his service. Still, he expected nothing less than absolute obedience from his soldiers. His command was law, and those who doubted his judgment would feel his wrath. As he was generous to his men, so was he terrible to his foes. He would burn down a village of innocents if it meant not letting the guilty escape. And judgment over he himself was to be done by God, by no one else. Karl clung to the legacy of Swedish Empire and saw it as his personal responsibility to keep fighting for its honor and existence. He fought the wars to right old wrongs, to recapture what was lost, and keep what was rightfully his, always believing that just one more decisive victory on the battlefield would turn it all around. Karl had seen life as a cycle of good and bad times. Just as he was victorious in the field, there would come a time when he would lose it all, only to rise back up once more. But in the end, it all vanished in this one fateful night in front of Fredrikshavn. Karl's death led to the end of the old Swedish Empire. Sweden would successfully defend itself, though, and soon enter an era of liberty, but both the absolute monarchy and the empire were lost forever.
So that's the time period, right? Once Karl dies, and you have this moment where you've been fighting all of these different, countries. This is the point where Sweden, if they go the way that most historical empires go, this is where they get wiped out, right? This is where they get wiped off the mat. Their enemies all turn in on them at the same time. Sweden has been left super vulnerable from, years of war and lack of food and a just drowning economy. And this is where historically the Sweden will be wiped off the map. And they're able to hold on, and that is, like I said, it makes them a historical outlier. The vast majority did not hold on. The vast majority of empires, vanished.
Swedish King Gustavus III, Gustav III, years later once said of Karl, "He was extraordinary rather than great. He certainly had not the true conquering temperament which simply aims at acquisition of territory. Karl took dominions with one hand only to give them away with the other. Superior to Alexander, with whom it were an injustice to compare him, he was as much inferior to his rival Peter in the qualities which make a great ruler as he excelled him in those qualities which go to make a great hero." What else can be said about Karl's reign? Was he a good king or a bad king? Did he resemble the hero of his own Greek tragedy, forced to fight a war that he would ultimately lose no matter what? Or was there a realistic chance that he could reinvigorate the Dominium Maris Baltici like his forefathers had envisioned? Or was he a selfish tyrant, one whose endless wars brought nothing but misery to his realm and his people? Over the centuries, people have remained fascinated with Karl's life, and it seems that history has still not made up its mind about him. The march begins in military state, and nations on his eye suspended wait. Stern famine guards the solitary coast, and winter barricades the realms of frost. He comes, nor want nor cold his course delay. Hide blushing glory, hide Poltava's day. The vanquished hero leaves his broken bands, and shews his miseries in distant lands, condemned and needy supplicant to wait, while ladies interpose and slaves debate. But did not chance at length his error mend? Did no subverted empire mark his end? Did rival monarchs give the fatal wound, or hostile millions press him to the ground? His fall was destined to a barren strand, a petty fortress, and a dubious hand. He left the name at which the world grew pale, to point a moral or adorn a tale. Samuel Johnson, The Vanity of Human Wishes. Now, Per, there is no English version of Ruina Imperii.
That is true. As the ending track of the Carolus Rex album, which was available in Swedish and in English, we wanted eventually to keep the legacy of the Swedish Empire a little bit longer and do our little part to tell people that they have to learn a little bit of Swedish to keep it growing.
I wonder how many people out there have actually memorized the Swedish lyrics.
More than you think. I know that there's a lot of you out there who can sing along to one song in Swedish, thanks to we never made an English version of it. And it's also funny, we actually we performed the full Carolus Rex album as a whole.
Yeah.
But we never played this song live because at the show when we did it, we had Caroleans coming out and we actually had the king, Carolus Rex, with us, and he was shot and there was a lot of things. And during this, we had the Caroleans moving out and marching out and doing a reenactment and then eventually firing and the band disappeared and got changed for the second part of the show. But it was very interesting to see the whole audience to sing along because for once we were also just observing. It was a Sabaton show, the stage is full of Caroleans and a dead king, and there's a huge audience, and we are just not playing.
And that... now, people must have asked for an English version, of course.
There are some people who ask for it, and some people who think that there was an error, but this was intentional from our side, that we wanted to have this one. Like, if you want to understand the full meaning, you got to learn Swedish.
And it is, it's a great concept album, a real, a hardcore concept album. And what was going on with the band then at the time that, this was happening? Because this is 2 albums. This, it's a lot. It's a lot to digest.
It's a big concept that we did, and it's very emotional. And when I listen to this song ending the album, I always think, because Carolus Rex for me means a lot, and it means a lot for all of us, because not only the amount of work we put into it, that it was such a again, a lot of people said we cannot do it, we shouldn't do it, an album in Swedish about Carolus Rex, about the Swedish Empire, you shouldn't do it, it's controversial. We did it anyway. People said it's not gonna sell, it sold more than anything we have done ever, and all the way it worked. But during this, we also had a lot of internal struggles. So this is by the time we are recording this in 2011 when, as some of you know, when Sabaton as it was formed, the Sabaton Mark I was disbanded. It was during the middle of the album recording, and we decided to go separate ways. And in order to finish the album in time, it was very hard work done by mainly Joachim, who had to wrap up because there was no more band. So a lot of guitars was played by him and things like that as well, in order to finish this album. And
wow, what an animal Joachim is, to basically just pick up everything as it sits with nobody, with nobody else there, basically, and just that's crazy.
I remember me and Joachim saying, okay, maybe there will be no more Sabaton after this, but let's at least finish this as a kind of a... Then if this is our final album, then let's do one hell of an album about it. And it was really hard to have the emotional things about we don't even know if there's a band that's gonna be with us anymore. And working writing double album. And then also trying to be creative without knowing if we can even go on tour, because how to go on tour without a band. And so all in all, this album, and specifically when I hear this song, because it ends the album, and it was one of the latest additions to the album. It's it was one of the I think the last song that was written for the album and added, and it doesn't have any guitar solo, and it's bit of a different vibe of the song. It reminds me a lot about this all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes that no fan, you guys didn't know about what was going on at that time. And also our record label Nuclear Blast had no idea that this, and I remember after we finished the album and I make the phone call down to Germany to the Nuclear Blast, and I say, guys, put it on speakerphone and pull all the team that is working with us in the same room. And when they are all there, guys, sit down. Okay, first the good news, we have finished an album and it is by far our best album. And then the bad news is that there is no more Sabaton at the moment. Jesus. And they were just silent. And they say, what do you mean? Well, I said, there's only me and Joachim left in the band. And they were absolutely stunned. And they said, no band can survive such a big change. And I was explaining to them, you have to trust us on this. We believe so strongly in Sabaton that...
Yeah, well, and not just that, but it wasn't like the band split when nothing was going on. Just the fact that those two basically had to pick everything up and push through to the end of the album kind of showed like they could do this, right? Like that there was still an opportunity for them to keep going.
We will be able to take it from here and raise it up and make it more powerful than ever. And they were so against us. First of all, we have made an album about something that they couldn't understand. Yeah. Why do when you do write album about international wars and suddenly you write about a Swedish king that they never heard of hundreds of years ago, and the Swedish party say don't do this because it's going to be controversial and maybe even forbidden in Sweden. And then, okay, and you're going to launch it without having a band, and you are splitting up a band that is very loved. This is the end of your band. And I have to spend a lot of effort convincing them that, guys, you have to put faith in this because we will turn this in our favor and we will come out very strong from this. And they trusted in us eventually, after a lot of convincing. And I think that now they are... everyone knows where it all ended up with a... Today, I think we are just a few numbers away from a 5 times platinum certification of an album, which is by Swedish means unprecedented in rock history.
Well, Perry, that was fascinating, actually. I was curious where the interview part of this song was going to go when we started it. You know, I knew a couple of things I wanted to talk about, but I didn't know we were going to go there. And I bet you guys didn't either. So that is where we will leave you today for Sabaton history.
Thank you for watching.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know any of that. I had heard reference in one of the videos to a band change, but I didn't know really what that entailed. Like if I didn't know. So that was actually really crazy. Yeah, that was a good one. I think the song I'm going to get to this afternoon is Poltava, I believe. Although don't hold me to that because it may be a different one, but I think that's what it is. But anyway, yeah, this was a good one from Sabaton History. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.